right, so we've got Diddy. It's been a little minute since we talked about Diddy on this channel. And since the last time we have talked about it, there have been a ton of developments, right? But today we're talking about Diddy because his trial is set to start in just about a week. Jury selection starts on May 5th. And if convicted, Diddy is looking at a mandatory minimum of 15 years and up to life in prison if he's convicted. He is facing a 5-count federal indictment in the Southern District of New York that includes 1 count of racketeering, 2 counts of trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, and 2 counts of interstate transportation for solicitation. Diddy has pled not guilty to all counts up to this point, and just 5 days ago, on April 25th, 2025, prosecutors revealed that they actually offered him a plea deal at some point during this whole thing, a plea deal that he rejected. Now, we don't know what was offered in the plea deal. It hasn't been revealed. We don't know how much time they were offering him, but for whatever reason, he decided he didn't want to take a plea. He wants to take it all the way to trial. And so now is a great time to go over everything that we probably can expect to see from the trial. Now, this is a federal case, so this won't be live streamed like you see a lot of other cases being live streamed on YouTube. There's really not going to be any footage of what goes down. The only thing that we're going to know throughout the trial and until it's over is whatever court reporters tell us, whatever the journalists that are in the courtroom tell us and post, and whatever is said to media after each court date. Now, keep in mind, this federal case is different than all of the civil cases that Diddy has been facing over the last year or two. Right? A lot of what's going on in them civil cases has nothing to do with these federal charges. So we're only going to speak about in this video what Diddy is facing criminally and what we can expect as trial progresses. So like I said, jury selection starts on May 5th, right? And jury selection in this case is going to be paramount to the outcome of the case. Diddy obviously has a major celebrity status. This case has a ton of notoriety. And so selecting an impartial jury for this case is going to be a delicate and possibly lengthy process. The court has already scheduled about 1 week for them to do what's called voir dire, which is basically where lawyers get to question prospective jurors and they kind of evaluate them to see if they're going to be able to give an impartial and fair analysis of the facts of the case with an open mind. Right? Given the nature of what Diddy is charged with, how big the case is, and all the other factors, it could be hard to find jurors that aren't already biased. Not to mention that there have been numerous documentaries dropped about this whole Diddy situation. There have been nonstop media reports about it. Millions of people have been made aware of what's going on in this case in some form or fashion. And so when they're doing these questions to try to figure out who's going to make it into the jury pool, they're going to be asking things like, what do you think about sex? Right? Questions that are going to make potential jurors uncomfortable. And they're going to have to do that in order to find people that aren't already biased to somebody doing freaky things like Diddy has done, or at least has allegedly done. People that will be able to hear the facts of the case and understand that somebody may be freaky consensually. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's criminal. Not saying that it's not criminal. The jury will have to decide that, but they're going to have to specifically find people that are already biased to that type of activity when done in a legal way, if that makes sense. So that could take quite a while to do. I can think of a few cases where jury selection has taken an astronomical amount of time. One example would be the YSL trial. Jury selection in that case took 10 months to complete. Granted, that was the state doing that. This is the federal government that's charging Diddy, but I mean, it could be a very lengthy process. Diddy's lawyers have already proposed a detailed questionnaire of 72 questions that are going to cover the jurors' backgrounds and attitudes. Some of those questions will be about the central issues at the heart of the case, like exposure to media coverage, views on sexual matters, personal experience with abuse, lifestyles and morals, racial or celebrity bias. These are things that they're going to ask the jury pool about. Obviously, the prosecutors have pushed back on some of that, saying that the questionnaire was overly extensive and that prying into sensitive and personal topics was unnecessary. And the government likely fears that a long, invasive questionnaire might deter jurors or lead to self-disqualifications. I'm sure that the judge in this case will probably strike a balance in between what both sides want. It definitely won't be the whole 72 question questionnaire that the defense is suggesting. But at the the end of the day, there will be a jury selected, and they're going to have to hear about everything that's went on in this case. One piece of evidence that they're going to be able to see is apparently the video of Diddy whooping Cassie's ass in the hallway that was broadcast to the whole world by CNN. The judge approved that as evidence the other day. And of course, Cassie is going to be involved in this trial. She's probably going to testify against Diddy. There's 4 victims in total in this case. Cassie is victim 1. We don't know who the other victims are. Their names have not been released, and all of the court documents that have been put out, it's redacted. So we don't really know much about any of the other accusers other than what they are accusing him of. Cassie is obviously going to give testimony about their decade-long relationship. She is likely going to give testimony about the freak-offs, and she's going to probably provide a first-hand account of many of the allegations that are in the indictments. The other 3 victims, victim 2, 3, and 4, are probably going to testify to having similar experiences. And while we don't know much, the public don't know much about who these victims are, Diddy does know who they are. You know, this information has been revealed to him and his team, just not to the public. So they'll be giving their testimony, and then there will be other supporting witnesses, you know, like professionals, doctors, employees, and associates, probably some law enforcement. We seen in the original DOJ complaint that they said that he was using his employees, high-ranking supervisors, security staff, personal assistants, and household staff as intermediaries to arrange travel and hotel rooms for these freak-offs, stock the hotel room, and make sure they were prepped for these freak-offs, or even to locate women and other individuals who he targeted for abuse. We may see some of those people get up there and testify. We've seen the DOJ say that Diddy also would assault witnesses to his abuse. So we may see witnesses get up there and testify against Diddy. People that seen these things happening, because apparently they're alleging that he also was abusive to them. We might also hear about digital evidence being used. We know that the indictment stated that Diddy often electronically recorded these sessions. And we've seen prosecutors indicate that these videos do exist, though due to their explicit nature, they plan to use them carefully. But we know that they say that they have at least a couple of videos. Those might end up getting played in front of the jury. Because remember, Diddy's whole thing was that everything he did was consensual and that everybody involved enjoyed it. Well, prosecutors aren't really probably wanting to play the tape, but I'm sure Diddy's defense is like, no, we need to play the tape because the tape might show that this is something that was enjoyed amongst everybody involved. I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm saying that's what Diddy's team is going to say was happening. So they may want them played. There's going to be expert witnesses. We know that the judge has allowed a psychologist named Dr. Don Hughes to testify in a limited capacity. Hughes is an expert on domestic violence and trauma and will explain concepts to the jury that could help jurors understand victim behavior and why victims may stay in abusive relationships. And it makes sense for them to have an expert like that, because I'm sure Diddy and them are going to argue that the women's long association with him kind of implies consent. So putting this person up there makes sense to explain why somebody may stay in a situation like that. Another part of this case is the prosecution alleging that Diddy pretty much was drugging these women to keep them quote unquote obedient and compliant. They are most certainly going to hit on that during the trial. And Diddy actually just recently came up with a new defense method that he is trying out, where he's pretty much said that anything that did happen under the influence of any narcotics, he shouldn't be held liable for, because he himself was high as shit. And he's pretty much trying to make the argument that he was experiencing a diminished mental capacity because of all of the drugs and alcohol that he was consuming, right? I don't know how that's going to work out for Diddy. You know, if I go to the bank and rob it, but I was high when I robbed it, it don't negate the fact that I robbed a bank. But this is a defense strategy that he just actually like yesterday started trying to employ. And the idea, I guess, is that he wants to argue, or his defense wants to argue to the jury, that in his state of mind, he wasn't able to form the criminal intent necessary to commit any of these offenses. I think that this is going to be a very weak defense, but he is expected to call his own medical expert, Dr. Leg. I can't say the last name, so I'm not gonna try, but he is an assistant professor of clinical psychology and a forensic psychiatrist. psychiatrist. And according to court documents, Dr. LEG didn't evaluate Diddy at any point, but he looked over all of the records and is expected to testify about the lucidness of Diddy while he was under the influence. Like I said, I think it's a weak defense, but apparently it's one that they're going with. Prosecutors obviously don't want him to go with this defense. They don't want this expert to even be able to take the stand. There's a lot of rules and exclusions that could disqualify this expert. But even if this expert is allowed to testify on Diddy's behalf, we did see this little bit right here in one of the court documents that said the usefulness of the expert testimony in determining whether Diddy was lucid during the course of his participation in a complex multi-year scheme is substantially reduced. So basically they're going to argue the effects of narcotics and alcohol only last a few hours. Even if he did have a reduced cognitive ability during that time, it's hard to argue he didn't know what he was doing considering he did it for years. Now, believe it or not, the prosecution doesn't have a slam dunk right here with this case. They still have to prove specific intent to commit crimes and not just a bad behavior. In other words, they got to prove that Diddy's actions crossed the line from immoral to illegal. Juries may be uncomfortable with Diddy's lifestyle, but discomfort isn't enough for a conviction. Prosecutors have to prove that he knowingly used force and coercion to commit crimes. Prosecutors do have an uphill battle, as they always do when they're convicting any case, but the prosecutors in this case have called the indictment very detailed and damning, and they've suggested that they have the evidence to convict Diddy. As far as Diddy's defense goes, their second defense strategy is pretty much going to be that Diddy was living a swinger lifestyle. They're going to say that everybody consented and everybody was okay with what was going on. And in response to that, I would say, consent as a defense works until you have a victim up on the stand crying and bawling their eyes out describing what happened to him. If the jury feels empathy for the victims when they give their testimony, the whole consent play is going to be pretty much out the window, in my opinion. A few key moments from this trial are definitely going to be Cassie's testimony, right? When they play the video of the assault that happened, because seeing is believing, and that video right there could definitely stick in jurors' minds as proof of Diddy's capacity to behave this way. The defense's cross-examination of Cassie and the other victims is going to be a critical moment in this trial, because if they get up there and they paint it as just the victims being vindictive and that they're in this whole thing for money, then that could be bad for the victims, because almost every victim in this case, while we don't know who they are, the prosecution has said that they all have pretty much filed civil suits against Diddy trying to seek a monetary settlement, right? That could hurt some of the victims' testimonies. So that'll be a critical moment how they do the cross-examination. But even if they do it that way, I believe one of the defense's toughest challenge is going to be explaining away the sheer volume of allegations, right? One person might lie, two people might lie, but when you have 4, 5, 6 people telling similar stories and there's videos and other evidence, then the defense team has to pretty much give the jury a reason to disbelieve everything that they're seeing, and that could be very hard for them to do. So I think those would be like some of the key moments that we hear a lot about in the media coverage that happens as this goes on. And so this is everything that we can expect from Diddy's upcoming trial. There is a lot going on. A lot of it can be confusing. I've tried to summarize it the best I could for you guys so that y'all know what to expect. Diddy has basically assembled the Avengers of lawyers for his defense team. He's got Mark Agnafilo, Brian Steele. He's got a couple of big named attorneys working on this case for him. But at the end of the day, nobody knows or can predict what the outcome of this trial is going to be. It is going to be left up to the 12 people that are sitting on that jury. And again, if convicted, Diddy is facing a minimum of 15 years, but up to life in prison. That is his worst case scenario. His best case scenario is that he beats it, he's acquitted, and he walks out of the courtroom that day a free man. However, even if he does, he still faces over 25 civil suits, and an acquittal in this case isn't going to prevent those other people from pursuing their claims through civil court. And then of course there is the potential for a partial verdict, which is where they convict him of some of the counts and not others. For example, they could find him guilty of trafficking but not not guilty of racketeering. Vice versa, they could convict him of racketeering, but acquit him of the trafficking charges. Any conviction on the trafficking count will still bring a mandatory minimum of 15 years though. So yeah, man, that's what we got. That's what y'all can expect to see when this trial starts up. Y'all know I'll keep y'all updated as it goes, but for now, that's everything that we got. That's the video. Y'all gotta let me know what y'all think about it in the comments down below. And as always, it's been fun rocking with y'all, man. I'm out.